Good teachers revive the nation. Nong Dai Tr letter 1B0 letter 1EDD NG, and the political philosophy of common sense by NGUY letter 1EC5 and Than Luan in Vietnamese history. The great turning points of the nation have often not originated from forums of power, but from silent shifts in the spiritual foundation. At such moments, the decisive role belongs not to those who hold power, but to teachers, those who preserve society's capacity to think correctly, speak correctly, and distinguish between legitimate authority and imposition. The idea that good teachers revive the nation is therefore not merely praise for the ethics of the teaching profession, but a serious historical observation. In the modern context, when the challenge no longer lies in foreign invasion or lack of knowledge, but in the weakening of political thinking capacity, the translation work of Nong Dai Tr letter 1B0, letter 1EDD, NG emerges as a special form of teaching, silent yet foundational in its influence. Nong Dai Tr letter 1B0, letter 1EDD, NG's translation of John Locke's two treatises of government and Thomas Paine's Common Sense were not two separate projects, but formed a complete political philosophy in the Vietnamese language. If Locke constructed the philosophical foundation for the legitimacy of government, then Paine brought that foundation into the civic space, where ordinary reason becomes the standard for judging power. By placing these two works side by side in Vietnamese, Nong Dai Tr letter 1B0, letter 1EDD, NG performed work that transcended the scope of translation. He constructed a language for Vietnamese society to think about politics with its own reason. Two treatises of government, especially the second treatise, builds a fundamental conception. Political power is not a gift from the divine or tradition, but the result of conditional delegation from free human beings. In Lockean thought, humans are born with natural rights, the right to life, liberty, and property, and government exists legitimately only when it protects these rights. When the contract is violated, power loses its legitimacy. Translating these arguments into Vietnamese was not a neutral act, for it required Vietnamese to be precise enough to express the subtle boundaries between obedience and consent. Through rigorous translation, Nong Dai Tr letter 1B0, letter 1EDD, NG forced Vietnamese readers to confront politics as a matter of reasoning and responsibility, rather than emotion or blind faith. If Locke spoke in the language of philosophy, Thomas Paine spoke in the language of the public square. Common sense does not seek to build a system of concepts, but directly questions what had been considered natural: monarchy, bloodline, and unconditional submission. Paine wrote for ordinary people, awakening in them the right to political judgment through universal reason. When Nong Dai Tr letter 1B0, letter 1EDD, NG translated Common Sense, he introduced into Vietnamese a form of political discourse previously unfamiliar: politics as a matter of self-evident right, not of authority. Common sense here is not trivial compromise, but the capacity to distinguish the reasonable from the unreasonable in the order of power. The key point that makes Nong Dai Tr letter 1B0, letter 1EDD, NG worthy of being called a good teacher lies in this. He did not propagate one doctrine to replace another, but opened up the capacity for political thinking in society. He did not tell readers which model to support, but provided them with tools to ask themselves: where does power come from, why does it exist, and where are its limits? In a society accustomed to receiving politics as command or slogan, restoring that capacity to question carries more foundational significance than any call for reform. At a deeper level, Nong Dai Tr letter 1B0, letter 1EDD, and GS translation work was also an effort to restore the political personhood of human beings. Both Locke and Paine proceeded from a common premise: humans are not born to be ruled, but to govern themselves through reason and morality. When these ideas are expressed rigorously in Vietnamese, they open up the possibility of forming a civic consciousness based on responsibility, not on fear or extreme confrontation. It is precisely here that translation becomes a form of political education, silent but enduring. If we place Nong Dai Tr letter 1B0, letter 1EDD, NG in the stream of good teachers revive the nation in Vietnamese history, we can see him continuing the spirit of teachers like M letter 1E1C Din Khai and Chu Van, and in a form suited to the times. not responding to foreign powers through literature, not remonstrating with power through memorials. He chose a harder path, preparing for society a language precise enough to dialogue with itself about power. A nation can only mature when its citizens have the capacity to think about government as a conditional institution, not as fate. Good teachers revive the nation, in this case, is not a slogan honoring teachers, but a proposition with cautionary significance. When teachers still maintain the rigor of thought, society retains the capacity to self-correct without requiring crisis. And it is in the silence of translated pages like two treatises of government and common sense that we can recognize the most profound form of national revival. Not building power, but building people capable of confronting power with common sense and reason, written in the moments of bidding farewell to a teacher. A good teacher who revives the nation of Vietnam.